This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there.
From Innistrad to Shadowmoor, what spooky top 10 does Nitzahone have in store?
Hi everyone, I'm Nitzahone, and it's time for another spooky MTG Top 10. As always, during the month of October, I do a few Halloween-inspired Top 10s. For example, last week we looked at scarecrows, and this time around we're going to look at creatures you can cast from your graveyard. Stuff coming back from the dead is very on theme for Halloween because it's a holiday that has its origins in beliefs that those who have died can return to the world on that very special day. 2006's Cold Snap was the first time we saw a creature that could do this in the form of Hakon Stromgald Scourge. He can only be cast from the graveyard, which is not the case for most cards with this effect. Anytime you do have a creature that can be cast from the graveyard, they can generate incredible value, especially if that creature was also in play at some point or milled or discarded for value. Basically, these creatures don't come with the usual downside of just being stuck in the graveyard until you have a card. These creatures have that kind of effect built into them. To be eligible for this list, a creature simply had to be castable from the graveyard. In all, there were 80 cards eligible, and in this video we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours. And a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. At number 10, it's Nethergoyf. For 1 black mana, it's a creature with power equal to the number of card types among cards in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to that number plus 1. So this is a creature that can be cast from the graveyard that also really likes the graveyard. In this case, it can be cast using the escape mechanic, something we'll see on a few other cards in this video. That mechanic allows you to pay a mana cost and exile some number of cards from your graveyard to cast the creature. In this case, you spend 2 generic and a black and exile any number of other cards from your graveyard with 4 or more card types among them. Basically, this is a 1-mana Tarmogoyf that only looks at your graveyard, but it trades the ability to also look at the opposing graveyard for a powerful recursive effect and a cheaper casting cost. While you might think escaping with this would mean that it comes back really small, the decks that use Nethergoyf are so good at loading up the graveyard that it's often still pretty massive when it escapes, and it's also just a really scary creature for only 1 mana in tempo decks, because it's one that can quickly end the game if your opponent doesn't have removal. It was printed in Modern Horizons 3, which means the only 60 card formats it's legal in are Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, and it's already seeing play in all 3, which feature plenty of graveyard action. Cards like Burning Inquiry and Psychic Frog, alongside a whole lot of other cheap spells, allow those decks to have no problem at making Nethergoyf into a huge threat. It's going to continue to put up top 8s in all 3 formats, and it's very likely to move up this list going forward, as it's one of the best 1-drops in a significant subset of decks in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. At number 9, it's Phoenix of Ash, another creature that can be cast from the graveyard using Escape. For 1 generic and 2 red, it's a 2/2 with flying and haste, and you can pay 2 generic and a red to give it +2/+0 until end of turn. The escape cost here is 2 generic and 2 red, and you exile 3 other cards from your graveyard, and when the Phoenix escapes, it comes with a +1/+1 counter. Phoenix of Ash can hit pretty hard and quickly thanks to its pseudo fire breathing and stat line, and your opponent just killing it once isn't going to put an end to things. In fact, the Phoenix will come back bigger and better than ever. It was played in red aggro decks while it was in standard, and while it's put up a few top 8s in other formats, it doesn't have any top 8s since 2023, and Nethergoyf is definitely going to pass it in the very near future. At number 8, it's Tenacious Underdog. For 1 generic and a black, it's a 3/2, and it has Blitz for 2 generic and 2 black, and you pay 2 life. This is an alternate casting cost, and if you choose to cast the Underdog that way, it gains haste and draws you a card when it dies, but it also gets sacrificed at the beginning of the next end step. So if you blitz it, you end up paying more mana, but in exchange you get haste and you draw a card. And of course, because it's on this list, you know that the Underdog can be cast from the graveyard, but only by paying the blitz cost. The other cards on this list stick around longer when they come back from the graveyard, But the Underdog can generate some really nice value thanks to the card draw it offers every time you bring it back. It can fit nicely into just about any kind of black deck. If you're an aggro deck, it's a good 2-drop with late game upside, and if you're a mid-range or control deck, it's a value engine that you gain access to even when you mill or discard it. For a time, the Underdog was incredibly heavily played in Standard. A good example of this was the new Capenna Championship, where the Underdog was in 5 of the top 8 decks, and in 3 completely different archetypes, including Esper and Jund mid-range, as well as Grixis aggro. Similarly, in Pioneer, the Underdog has been played in aggressive decks like Rakdos Sacrifice, which really liked being able to give the Underdog up multiple times, and it's also been played in control decks like Mono Black. It's also seen a little bit of play in Modern, but it doesn't have a top 8 anywhere so far in 2025, and it may be done putting up top finishes. At number 7, it's Woe Strider. For 2 generic and a black, it's a 3/2 that makes a 0/1 white goat token when it enters. It can also sacrifice another creature to scry 1. We could stop there, and this would be a pretty solid card since it brings 2 bodies to the table and is a free sacrifice outlet, something that is always very easy to abuse, but this creature can also escape, in this case for 3 generic and 2 black, and you exile 4 other cards from your graveyard, and when it comes back that way, it comes with 2 +1/+1 counters, so you basically get a 3 mana 3/2, a 5 mana 5/4, 2 goat tokens, and a good sacrifice ability out of only a single card, which is some incredible value. In both Standard and Pioneer, it found the most success in sacrifice decks, which loved creatures that gave you multiple bodies to sacrifice, and free sacrifice outlets, and Woe Strider is both of those things. Creatures like Korvold and Mayhem Devil give you extra value for making those sacrifices, and you could also use Claim the Firstborn to steal an opposing creature and sacrifice it without paying any mana, which was a pretty disgusting play. Woe Strider is played in more combo-oriented decks in Modern, like Yawgmoth combo decks, which like to use Yawgmoth and creatures with Undying together, like Geralf's Messenger and Young Wolf. When an Undying creature dies, it comes back to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. Then you can use Yawgmoth's ability to put a -1/-1 counter on it, and those 2 counters cancel each other out. And that means you can just sacrifice the creature again and just keep bringing it back. And if that creature is the messenger, your opponent will run out of life before you do. Woe Strider is one of the free sacrifice outlets the deck uses to create this sacrifice loop that eventually wins you the game. Woe Strider is still putting up top 8s in Pioneer and Modern, and it could end up higher on this list in the future. At number 6, it's Malevolent Hermit. For 1 generic and a blue, it's a 2/1, and you can pay 1 blue and sacrifice it to have it counter-target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 3 generic. You can also cast it from your graveyard using the Disturb mechanic. That means if you cast it with this alternate cost, it comes back to the battlefield transformed. In this case, that cost is 2 generic and a blue, and it comes back as Benevolent Geist, a 2/2 flyer that makes your non-creature spells uncounterable, and if it would be put into a graveyard, it gets exiled instead. So Disturb creatures generally can't be brought back from the graveyard multiple times, but they can be cast from the graveyard once. What you get here is a 2-drop that can give itself up to stop a non-creature spell, and then come back as a somewhat threatening flyer that makes your own stuff uncounterable. That's a lot of value from only a single card, plus if you discard it or otherwise get it into the graveyard, you can still get value out of it thanks to Disturb. While in Standard it saw lots of play in control and mid-range decks, it's also gone on to have success in every other format it's ever been legal in, including the Eternal formats. There it's been used in combo decks where both sides are pretty effective at protecting your combo. It's still seeing some occasional play right now, but has slowed down a lot in 2025, so it may be done adding significantly to its score. At number 5, it's Dennick, Pious, Apprentice. For a white and a blue, it's a 2/3 with lifelink, and it makes it so that cards in graveyards can't be the target of spells or abilities. It's another creature with Disturb. In this case, you pay 2 generic, a white, and a blue, and it comes back as Pious Apparition, a 3/2 flyer that gives you a clue whenever 1 or more creatures are put into the graveyard from anywhere. It also gets exiled when it would be put into a graveyard. Dennick saw a lot of play in Standard, perhaps most notably in the legendary-centric Esper Raffine deck. This deck loved legendary creatures because of payoffs like Plaza of Heroes, but it also loved cards that could give you value out of the graveyard, since Raffine's Connive ability could be used to buff a creature, and then you'd still get a body back from the graveyard that turn. And the body you got back was going to generate a ton of clues alongside Raffine and the other legends who had discard and mill effects. It also doesn't hurt that it's a 2-mana 2/3 that's pretty good at simultaneously protecting your graveyard and hating on certain graveyard strategies. In addition to always being played in those dominant Esper Raffine decks, it was also played in Azorius Soldiers and blue-white control decks while in Standard. It has since rotated, of course, and these days it only sees intermittent play in blue-white control decks in Pioneer. At number 4, it's Gravecrawler. For me, this is the first card I think of when I think of a creature I can cast from the graveyard. For 1 black mana, it's a 2/1 that can't block, and if you control a zombie, you can cast Gravecrawler from your graveyard. Gravecrawler has one of the strongest recursion effects in the game, since you can simply pay a single black mana to get it back, provided you control a zombie, and you can do it over and over again. This gets especially potent alongside free sacrifice effects, especially when you can do the sacrificing with a fellow zombie. In Standard, Gravecrawler was mostly played in various black and black-red aggro decks that featured several other zombies. These decks ran Mortar Pod, which could give you a constant source of damage if you sacrifice Gravecrawler to it. The Crawler could just keep going at your opponent and just keep coming back without too much difficulty. He's also put up top 8s in modern Vengevine decks, where the two creatures could really feed off of one another, since Vengevine wants you to cast multiple creature spells in a turn, and Gravecrawler makes that a lot easier. These decks also used Bridge from Below, which itself makes sure you have zombies in play to bring back the Crawler, since it gives you a zombie every time you sacrifice Gravecrawler. It was also played in a legacy combo deck called Zombie Bombardment, decks that sought to just keep hitting the opponent with Goblin Bombardment and Gravecrawler until they were dead. In 2019, it saw a huge uptick in play in Modern thanks to the original Modern Horizons, which made Carrion Feeder legal in Modern for the first time. Those two are quite the engine, especially if you have a Bridge from Below in the graveyard, since you can just sacrifice Gravecrawler over and over to the feeder, getting a zombie each time and growing your feeder. This was a really powerful combo, and it went well with some other things going on in Modern at the time, things which we'll talk about further up on the list, but suffice it to say, ultimately Bridge from Below got banned in Modern. More recently, Modern Horizons 3 has resulted in an increase in how much Gravecrawler is played because of Warren's Soul Trader. The Trader has a free sacrifice effect that costs no mana and gives you a treasure, and it happens to be a zombie. So you can just cast Gravecrawler and sacrifice Gravecrawler over and over again. And if you have Zolaport Cutthroat in play, that's a game-winning combo. Meanwhile, the Crawler still sees play in legacy graveyard decks that like Bridge from Below, and it's going to keep amassing points, especially in Modern. At number 3, it's Ox of Agonas. For 3 generic and 2 red, it's a 4/2, and when it enters, you discard your hand and draw 3 cards. It also has Escape for 2 red mana, and you have to exile 8 other cards in your graveyard, and it comes back with a +1/+1 counter. The Ox is great at loading the graveyard and or reloading your hand when you need more gas, and while it's demanding when it comes to the number of cards to exile with Escape, it's also very cheap, and its own interest trigger can help make that easier. Plus, never paying 5 for it is pretty doable too, as you can just keep escaping it. While in Standard, it was played in Gruul aggro decks as a way to make sure you didn't run out of gas. It also saw significant sideboard play in the format where more aggressive decks could bring it in for grindier matchups, where the chance of escaping with it were much higher. In Pioneer, it's been played alongside Arclight Phoenix, which is played in decks that have tremendous incentives for loading the graveyard, both by casting cheap spells and discarding the Phoenix so you can bring it back for free. More recently, it's been played in Monument to Endurance decks, which use that powerful artifact to get extra value out of discarding cards, like the Ox's Interest Trigger. In Modern, it's played in Hollow One decks, which also have tons of incentives for discarding, like the eponymous Hollow One, but discarding Blazing Rootwalla so you can cast it for free, or a Vengevine because you can easily get it back works quite nicely too. And in Legacy, it's played in Dredge decks, which love effects that simultaneously let you discard and draw cards because they can allow you to add a huge number of cards to your graveyard. This is because the Dredge mechanic allows you to choose to return a card with Dredge from your graveyard to your hand. Anytime you withdraw a card, all you have to do is mill cards equal to that card's Dredge value. So a card that lets you discard Dredge cards and trigger Dredge with card draw is right at home in the deck. Basically, the Ox is seeing significant play in Modern, Pioneer, and Legacy right now, and that's not going to stop, so it does have a chance at moving higher on the list in the future. At number 2, it's Hogaak Arisen Necropolis. For 5 generic and 2 black-green hybrid mana, Hogaak comes with Trample. You can cast him from your graveyard, but you can't spend mana on Hogaak. That last part would be a pretty big hurdle, but he also comes with 2 cost reduction mechanics, Convoke and Delve. Convoke means you can tap creatures to help pay for the cost, and Delve means you can exile cards from your graveyard to help pay for the cost. Those 2 abilities make it very easy to cast this. It was printed in Modern Horizon, so it was never legal in formats like Standard or Pioneer, but Modern, Legacy, and Vintage are all formats where loading the graveyard quickly is incredibly easy, and that meant Hogaak could come into play on turn 2 with regularity. This could be accomplished with Bridge from Below and Altar of Dementia. As already mentioned, the Bridge also works really well alongside Carrion Feeder and Gravecrawler, ultimately giving you enough cards in the graveyard and enough cards in play to quickly have what you need to cast a very early Hogaak. As such, Hogaak was only legal in Modern for 2 months before getting banned there, but Hogaak has been powerful enough to continue to put up points in the Eternal formats. He's found significant success in Legacy Dredge, and in Vintage, its primary home has been Bazaar of Baghdad aggro decks. This is a deck loaded up with discard and draw effects like the Bazaar that intends to then rapidly populate the board with creatures who can come out of the graveyard, or who have casting costs of 0 as a result of all the cards that are discarded, like Hollow One. In that deck, it isn't that unusual for Hogaak to come down on turn 1 alongside several other creatures. Hogaak is going to continue to amass points in both Legacy and Vintage, but it's not doing it at an insane rate or anything, so it's probably never going to do better than number 2 on this list. And at number 1, I've included 3 cards, because they're all part of the same mega cycle, and they would have been number 1, number 2, and number 4 on this list, and putting them together meant that we got to talk about even more cards. Those cards are the 3 Elder Giants: Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, Kroxa, Titan of Death's Hunger, and Phlage, Titan of Fire's Fury. They all have 2-color identities, are all 6/6s who get sacrificed when they enter if they didn't escape. They each have an enters or attacks trigger, and they all require 2 mana of each of their colors and exiling 5 cards for them to escape. Basically, they all generate value with a spell-like effect when cast normally from your hand, and then you can bring them back later on a more permanent and much scarier basis. Let's start with Phlage, since he's the newest and has the lowest score. He's also not actually from the same set as Kroxa or Uro. That's what makes it a mega cycle instead of just a cycle. Anyway, he costs 1 generic, a red, and a white, and his enters or attacks trigger does 3 damage to any target and you gain 3 life. He's from Modern Horizons 3, so unlike Uro and Kroxa, he's never been legal in Standard or Pioneer, but since being printed last year, he has caught on in a massive way in Modern, warping the entire format ever since being printed. Paying 3 mana for Lightning Helix early, and a few turns later, getting a Lightning Helix engine is pretty insane. Removing things and gaining life is just very difficult to beat when it's on this scary of a recursive creature. It's played in decks like Boros Energy, a deck loaded up with Modern Horizons 3 cards like Ocelot Pride, who can generate even more value off of Phlage's ability to gain life. These days, it's more frequently seen in Jeskai control decks, though, where he tends to be the deck's primary win condition. These decks run Dress Down, which can be used to make it so Phlage doesn't actually get sacrificed, so you can get him into play much earlier and much more permanently. Phlage has also found success in Legacy, where it's used alongside Dress Down as well, and it's going to continue to put up lots of top 8s going forward, and in the long run has a shot at overtaking its older brothers. For now though, Uro and Kroxa are ahead of him. Let's talk about Kroxa next. Kroxa is a black and a red. His enters or attacks trigger makes each opponent discard a card, and then each opponent who didn't discard a non-land card that way loses 3 life. Kroxa is cheaper than the other 2 Titans, which is pretty great, and his enters trigger can really punish the opponent with disruption. Most of the time it's ideal to make an opponent discard a non-land card, but even if they do discard a non-land card in this case, you still get a card of value and you make them lose 3 life, which is pretty great. And obviously if their hand is empty, he makes them lose 3 life too. While in Standard, Kroxa was played in Rakdos aggro decks as well as sacrifice decks that didn't mind so much that Kroxa sacrificed himself when cast normally. He's been more prolific in Pioneer, where he appears not only in sacrifice decks but also Rakdos midrange. He's also seen tons of play in Modern too, in more discard-oriented decks like Hollow One and Death Shadow. His success in Legacy has been more limited, but he's shown up in Reanimator and Arc-like Phoenix decks from time to time. Kroxa is going to continue to put up top 8s, just like the other 2 Titans. And that brings us to the last one, and the one that is rightly considered, I think, the most powerful, and it does have the most points of the 3. I'm talking, of course, about Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. For 1 generic, a green, and a blue, its enters or attacks trigger gains you 3 life, draws you a card, and then you can put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. So, Phlage and Kroxa can both pressure the opponent's life total in a big way. Uro doesn't really do that with its enters or attacks trigger, not directly anyway, but it does give you 3 pretty great effects. Gaining 3 life means you're more likely to live longer, to take advantage of the card you draw and the mana advantage that Uro gives you. It also means you're more likely to live long enough to get Uro back from the graveyard, at which point he starts doing this every single turn. Uro has had a large impact on several different formats. In Standard, it was completely dominant, showing up in the top 2 decks of the format, which were Bant and Sultai Ramp. It was the most played non-land card at several different Standard events, contributing to a huge score that came only in a matter of months. Uro also found success in other formats too, and ultimately it ended up being banned out of Standard, Historic, Pioneer, and Modern. This has caused it to slow down, but it's also being played in Legacy and Vintage, so it probably isn't completely done, but it is at a bit of a disadvantage compared to Kroxa and Phlage, who are legal in more formats. So, those are Magic's best creatures that you can cast from the graveyard. Do you like creatures that won't stay dead? If so, check out the description where you can find a direct card kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on past videos, including more Halloween-themed MTG Top 10s, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.